In the radiant heart of ancient Persia stood a palace of marble and gold, where King Shahryar ruled with both wisdom and might. His court shimmered with life. Musicians played beneath hanging lanterns. Courtiers debated poetry and philosophy, and traders from faraway lands offered silks, jewels, and stories. The kingdom prospered under his rule, and the people spoke his name with pride. They said the king's smile was as bright as the morning sun and his judgment as even as the moonlight upon the desert sands. But even in a world so full of splendor, shadows can grow unseen. Among all his treasures, Shahryar valued none more than his queen, a woman of rare beauty and charm. Her laughter echoed through the courtyards like music, and her eyes held the sparkle of starlit water. He loved her deeply, perhaps too deeply, for his heart had never learned the cautious ways of kings. She was his companion, his friend, and the soul of his happiness. Together, they walked in the palace gardens at dusk, speaking of dreams and destiny, while nightingales sang in the orange trees. Then came the day that turned love to ashes. It began, as any morning did, with the first light filtering through the lattice windows and the king preparing for a hunt. His brother, King Schahzaman, of a neighboring realm, had arrived for a visit, and the two spent their days celebrating their bond. Yet one dawn, as Schahzaman prepared to join his brother in the royal gardens, he returned unexpectedly to his chambers, and what he saw there pierced him like a poisoned dagger. His own wife, whom he cherished, lay in the arms of a servant. His cry of fury filled the palace. Guards rushed in. Justice was swift, but his soul was shattered. With heavy heart, he confessed the betrayal to Shahryar, who listened in disbelief, trying to comfort his brother. To ease his pain, Shahryar suggested that they go hunting together, to forget sorrow for a time. But fate had more cruelty to deliver. While Schahzaman rested in the palace, he looked from his window and saw a sight that froze his blood. In the royal garden below, Shahryar's queen, surrounded by her maids, laughed and danced. When she thought no eyes were upon her, she called to one of the guards, a man of striking youth, and drew him close in secret embrace. Her laughter carried on the wind, mocking the sanctity of her crown. Schahzaman's heart twisted with horror. "Brother," he whispered to himself, "even the mighty are betrayed." His wound felt lighter only because Shahryar's would be far deeper. He waited until the king returned and told him everything, though his voice trembled with pity. At first Shahryar refused to believe. "You speak in grief, and grief clouds your sight," he said, "but suspicion, once sown, grows like a thorn." That night, feigning sleep, the king watched from his chamber window, and saw the truth with his own eyes. His queen, the jewel of his life, met her lover beneath the very moon that had witnessed their vows. Rage, cold and merciless, overtook him. The next dawn, the queen and her servant were brought before him. The court fell silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. "You have stolen the peace of a kingdom," Shahryar declared. His heart warred between love and vengeance, but vengeance won. The traitors were executed, their betrayal buried beneath the palace stones. Yet, no blade could cut away the pain that remained. The king's laughter died, and in its place came a silence darker than midnight. From that day forth, Shahryar trusted no woman, no smile, no promise. He looked upon his brother and said, "Never again shall I be deceived. I will wed each night a maiden, and at dawn she shall die. Thus shall no woman's treachery ever touch me again." His brother, still broken by his own loss, nodded in grim agreement. Together they justified their cruelty as justice, though their hearts had become the true prisoners. Word of the king's decree spread like fire across the land. The people wept behind closed doors, fathers hid their daughters, and mothers cursed the heavens. The once joyous palace grew cold. Music ceased, and flowers withered in the gardens. Every evening the drums of marriage sounded like a funeral call, and by sunrise, another innocent life was lost. Thus began the reign of fear and sorrow, a kingdom ruled by pain and silence. Yet somewhere within that silence, destiny stirred. For among the king's subjects was a young woman whose courage would one day challenge the darkness itself. Her name was Scheherazade, and she carried in her heart the power of 1,000 stories. The power to heal a broken king. Days passed after the queen's execution, but peace never returned to King Shahryar's heart. He roamed his palace like a restless spirit, silent, sleepless, and haunted by memories. The music that once filled his halls was silenced. The fountains seemed to whisper betrayal in every drop of water that fell. Servants moved in fear, speaking only in whispers. For even the sound of laughter angered the king. His brother, Schahzaman, stayed with him, sharing the same grief. The two kings sat together in the long nights, drinking wine and speaking of the unfaithfulness of women. "They smile," said Schahzaman bitterly, "but behind their smiles lie deceit." And Shahryar, whose heart was bleeding, replied, "Then let none of them live long enough to betray us again." So it was that vengeance gave birth to a terrible idea. One morning, Shahryar called for his grand vizier, a wise, loyal man who had served his father before him. The vizier bowed low before the throne, expecting counsel about the affairs of the kingdom. But the king's words froze the very air. From this day forward, Shahryar declared, his voice cold as stone, "I shall take a wife each night. At dawn, she shall die." No woman will ever again live long enough to betray me." The vizier's face turned pale. "My lord," he whispered, "you are the ruler of Persia, the protector of your people. Such a command will bring sorrow to every home." The king's eyes darkened. "I have seen sorrow already," he thundered. "What greater sorrow can there be than betrayal? Go, do as I command." The vizier bowed, but his steps faltered as he left the throne room. His duty was obedience, but his soul was heavy with dread. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first maiden was brought to the palace. She was young and radiant, her eyes wide with terror. The drums of marriage sounded through the city, and though the people knew what awaited her at dawn, none dared to speak against the king's will. When the morning came, the drums sounded again, but this time for death. So began the king's cruel law. Each day, a new name was chosen. Each night, a new bride was taken. And each morning, another life ended in sorrow. The kingdom, once alive with laughter and song, now lay under a shroud of mourning. Mothers clutched their daughters tightly. Fathers begged the heavens for mercy, and every household prayed that their child's name would not be the next. Whispered by the vizier's servants, the vizier himself suffered most of all, for it was his task to bring each maiden to the palace gates. His heart broke anew every night as he watched another innocent girl led to her doom. He tried to reason with the king, to speak of justice and compassion, but Shahryar's heart was blind to all reason. "My pain is the pain of every man who has been deceived," he said. "Let the world learn from my sorrow." And so, night after night, the cycle continued. The once busy markets grew quiet. The laughter of children faded. Weddings ceased, and young men refused to take wives, fearing the grief that might follow. Even the birds seemed to have fled from the city walls, as though the kingdom itself mourned the loss of its joy. One evening, as the vizier prepared to bring yet another maiden to the palace, his daughter Scheherazade approached him. She had heard the people's cries and seen the despair that filled their streets. Her heart ached with sorrow and anger. "Father," she said softly, "how long will this bloodshed continue?" The vizier sighed deeply. "Until the king's heart remembers mercy," he said, "but that may never be." Scheherazade stood silently for a moment, her eyes full of thought. Then she looked up, determination burning within her. "If no one dares to end it," she whispered, "then I must." Her father turned to her in shock. "Child, do not speak such madness." But the seed of destiny had already been planted. Scheherazade, known throughout the land for her wisdom and courage, had made her choice. Though the night was still wrapped in grief, somewhere in the heart of the kingdom, the first spark of hope flickered to life. The cruel law of King Shahryar had begun from the ashes of betrayal. But destiny was already weaving the threads of its end. For in the days to come, the voice of a single woman would prove more powerful than the sword of 1,000 kings. The sun rose over the city of Persia, gilding its domes and towers in gold, but there was no joy in the morning light. The streets that once buzzed with merchants and laughter now echoed with silence. Behind every window, mothers clutched their daughters close, praying that this day would not bring the knock of the vizier, for it was the vizier, loyal servant of King Shahryar, who carried out the cruelest duty in the kingdom. Each dawn, he had to find a new bride for the king, knowing that by the next sunrise, her life would end. His steps through the marketplace were met with fear and grief. Doors closed at his approach. Whispers followed behind him like shadows, and though he was blameless in heart, the people saw him as the messenger of death. The vizier was an old man, wise and honorable. He had served Shahryar's father before him, had held the infant king in his arms, and had taught him the ways of justice and mercy. But now, each day, he was forced to watch that same king slip further into darkness. The burden of his duty crushed him. His spirit grew frail, and his eyes, once bright with pride, were clouded with sorrow. One morning, when the vizier returned home, after delivering another trembling maiden to the palace gates, he fell to his knees before the image of the Almighty and wept. "O Lord of mercy," he cried, "why must I be the hand of this tragedy? Why have you placed such cruelty upon my shoulders?" But the heavens were silent. The only answer was the sound of his own heart breaking. That evening, as he sat in silence, his daughter Scheherazade entered the room. She was a woman of rare beauty, but more than that. She was known throughout the land for her wisdom, courage, and compassion. Her eyes, deep and bright, held the calm of one who sees truth beyond fear. She had grown up listening to tales of faraway lands, of kings and sages, of creatures both divine and monstrous. She believed that every story carried a lesson, and that words, when spoken with courage, could heal the wounds that swords could not. Her father looked up as she entered, his face weary and pale. She approached him softly and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "Father," she said gently, "why do you grieve so deeply?" "How could I not grieve?" he replied bitterly. "Each day, I must choose a daughter of this land and deliver her to death. Each day, I am cursed by the cries of mothers and the tears of the innocent. I have served my king with honor, but this task is beyond endurance." Scheherazade's heart ached at his words. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the tremble in his hands each time he returned from the palace. She had heard the women in the city praying that the vizier's eyes would pass over their homes. "Father," she said softly, "what if there were a way to end this?" He frowned, not understanding. "There is no end to the madness of kings," he said. "Shahriyar's heart is locked in stone." Scheherazade's gaze did not waver. "Then perhaps," she said, "stone can be broken not by force, but by words." Her father stared at her, the meaning of her words dawning slowly. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," she said firmly, "that you must take me to the king. I will be his next bride." The vizier recoiled as if struck. "Never," he cried. "I will not sacrifice my own daughter to that monster." But Scheherazade stood tall, her eyes shining with quiet strength. "If I die," she said, "let it be for a purpose greater than fear. I have a plan. Father, I will tell the king stories that awaken his heart and remind him of the goodness he has forgotten. If I fail, I shall die like the others. But if I succeed, perhaps no other daughter of Persia will have to perish." Her father trembled, torn between love and duty. He begged her to abandon this madness, but she would not. "You taught me that courage is the light of wisdom," she said softly. "Now, let me prove it." The vizier's tears fell freely. He saw in her the same noble spirit that had once guided kings. Finally, he bowed his head in surrender. "If this is truly your choice, my daughter, then I will not deny you, but my heart will bleed with every step you take toward that palace." That night, as the lamps flickered in their home, Scheherazade prepared herself for her destiny. The vizier looked upon her with both pride and despair, knowing that by dawn, his world might be forever changed, and so began the most fateful choice of all, not one made by kings or soldiers, but by a single woman whose courage would soon turn the tides of the kingdom. Drowned in sorrow, night had fallen softly over the city of Persia. The moon hung pale and watchful above the golden domes, its silver light spilling across the palace walls like a blessing, or perhaps, a warning. Inside a modest house near the edge of the royal gardens, the vizier sat motionless, staring into the flickering flame of an oil lamp. His heart was heavy, for tonight he would take his own daughter to the king, to the man who had ended so many lives. Scheherazade moved quietly around the room, calm as the desert before dawn. She wore a simple gown of soft linen, white as peace itself. Her dark hair fell freely over her shoulders, and in her eyes burned a steady courage that neither fear nor sorrow could extinguish. She had made her choice, and her resolve was unshakable. Her younger sister Dunyazad watched her in disbelief. "Sister," she whispered, "how can you walk into the jaws of death without trembling? Have you no fear?" Scheherazade smiled faintly and touched Dunyazad's cheek. "Of course I have fear," she said gently, "but fear is not an enemy, little one. It reminds us what must be protected. If my courage can save even one girl from the fate that awaits, then I must go." Dunyazad's eyes filled with tears. "Then let me come with you," she pleaded. "You cannot," said their father firmly. "You are still a child. You do not know the danger." But Scheherazade turned to him and shook her head. "Father, I need her there. Listen to me, I have a plan. When we are in the royal chamber, just before dawn, Dunyazad will ask me to tell a story. I will begin, and I shall end it with a mystery so deep that the king will wish to hear its conclusion. He will spare my life for one more night to learn what happens next. And then, I will begin another tale, and another. With every story, I will open a door in his heart until he can no longer bear to live in darkness." The vizier stared at her, torn between awe and despair. "You are too brave, my daughter," he murmured, "and bravery can be as dangerous as love." "Then, let me be both," Scheherazade replied, "for it is love of our people that guides me." Now, the moon had risen higher when the royal guards arrived at their door. The vizier's knees trembled as he led Scheherazade to the waiting carriage. Along the narrow streets, people peeked from their windows. Some gasped, recognizing the vizier's daughter, a woman known for her wisdom and kindness. Others fell silent in prayer. No one believed she would return. That as the palace gates opened before them, the air itself seemed to grow colder. The courtyard was vast and gleaming, but the silence that hung there was heavier than stone. When Scheherazade stepped from the carriage, her feet touched marble that had been washed with the tears of 100 maidens. King Shahryar awaited her in the grand hall. His face was stern and unreadable, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He looked upon her with the same indifference he had given to every bride before her. "So," he said, "you are the vizier's daughter. Do you come willingly?" "I do," my lord, Scheherazade replied, bowing gracefully. Her voice was calm, clear, and filled with dignity. He studied her for a long moment, surprised by her composure. There was no pleading in her eyes, no trembling in her voice. "You are not afraid?" he asked. "Afraid of death?" She said softly. "No, my king. Every soul must meet its destiny. But I believe even destiny listens to those who speak with truth." Something in her tone, a spark of mystery, perhaps, caught his attention. He said nothing more, only motioned for the ceremony to begin. The royal priests recited their blessings. The wedding drums thundered through the night, and the kingdom held its breath. When all was done, the king led Scheherazade to his chamber, vast and cold as a tomb. Dunyazad, as permitted, entered quietly and sat near the candlelight. Hours passed in silence until Scheherazade turned to her sister and said, "Dearest Dunyazad, if it pleases the king, will you allow me to pass this night by telling you one final story before I die?" Dunyazad nodded quickly. "Please, sister," she said, "tell us something wonderful." Sharyar, curious, despite himself, leaned back and said, "Very well, speak." And as the night deepened, Scheherazade began her tale, a story of a merchant and a demon, of destiny and mercy, of wisdom that could soften even the hardest of hearts. The king listened, silent and entranced, as her voice wove a tapestry of words brighter than gold. And just as dawn began to break, Scheherazade paused, her eyes glimmering. "My lord," she said softly, "if you wish to hear how the tale ends, you must spare my life until tomorrow." The king's heart, long frozen, stirred with curiosity for the first time in years. "Very well," he said, "you shall live one more day." And thus, a new dawn rose, not of blood and sorrow, but of hope. Dawn crept softly over the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of gold and rose. In the palace of King the air was different that morning, calmer, lighter, as if the walls themselves had heard something sacred in the night. The servants who entered the royal chamber expected to find tragedy, as they had every morning for months. Yet to their astonishment, the new queen, the vizier's daughter, Scheherazade, still lived. She sat near the window, gazing out at the rising sun, her face serene. The king, instead of ordering her death, sat silently beside her. Lost in thought, the news spread through the palace like wildfire. "The queen lives." The maids whispered, the guards exchanged glances, and even the cook in the royal kitchen paused his work to listen. None could believe it. For the first time since the cruel law began, a morning had come without morning. That evening, when the sun dipped below the edge of the desert and the lamps of the palace flickered to life, the king summoned Scheherazade once more. "Finish your tale," he said, though his voice carried not command, but curiosity. And so Scheherazade continued. She told of a merchant, a mighty demon, and 3 old men who came to offer their stories in exchange for mercy. Her voice was soft but strong, carrying the rhythm of waves, the warmth of firelight, and the mystery of dreams. Every word wove a spell around the king's wounded heart. As she spoke, Shahryar forgot the bitterness that had once devoured him. The shadows in his soul seemed to draw back, if only slightly. And when dawn came again, just as the story reached its most wondrous turn, Scheherazade paused once more. "My king," she said gently, "the day breaks, and I cannot tell you the rest until the night returns." The king, caught between frustration and wonder, laughed a sound that startled even himself. "Very well," he said, "you shall live yet another day." Thus began the rhythm that would define 1,000 nights. But before that long journey began, the roots of Scheherazade's plan had taken hold, a plan both dangerous and delicate, woven from wisdom, compassion, and time. Each morning, before the sun rose fully, she met her sister Dunyazad in secret. The two would plan which tale would follow the next, what lesson it would carry, what emotion it would stir. Tonight, Scheherazade would whisper, "I will speak of loyalty, of how even the smallest act of mercy can change the heart of a monster." And Dunyazad would nod eagerly. "And if the king asks questions, delay your ending again, sister. His curiosity will keep you safe." Curiosity, Scheherazade smiled softly, is the chain that binds cruelty. As long as he listens, he cannot destroy it. Yet she knew the risk she carried was great. If ever the king grew bored, if ever her story failed to catch his imagination, her life would end at dawn. She was dancing on the edge of death, her words the only bridge between life and oblivion. Still, Scheherazade did not falter. Her plan was not just to survive, it was to heal the king's broken soul. She understood that beneath his anger lay a wound, deep and unhealed. To destroy him would only bring more pain to her people, but to change him, that, she believed, was possible. Each night's tale was carefully chosen. One story spoke of justice, another of compassion. Some were thrilling adventures, others gentle fables. Each carried a message, hidden like a jewel beneath layers of wonder. And so, night after night, the palace transformed. Where once there had been silence, now there was the melody of Scheherazade's voice, telling of sailors and kings, of genies and merchants, of fate and forgiveness. Even the servants, who lingered near the doors, began to listen in secret. The palace, once a tomb of sorrow, began to breathe again. As for King Shahryar, he found himself waiting for the night, eager for the sound of her voice. He watched her with quiet fascination, this woman who spoke not as a victim but as a queen, whose courage and wisdom rivaled his own. He began to wonder how such a heart could ever be false. But Scheherazade knew her battle was not yet won. "The night is my ally," she whispered to Dunyazad one morning, "but dawn is my enemy. Every sunrise brings the risk of death." Her sister took her hands, trembling. "Then promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll tell your stories until the king himself begs you to live." Scheherazade smiled faintly. "That is my plan, dearest one, to turn his hunger for blood into hunger for words." And so, under the watchful stars, her dangerous plan continued. Each night, another tale. Each dawn, another chance at life. Each word, another step toward the redemption of a king. for Scheherazade knew the greatest truth of all, that no sword, no kingdom, and no cruelty can stand forever against the power of a story well told. As the moon rose above the golden domes of the palace, a hush fell over the kingdom of King Scheherazade. Word had spread swiftly. The cruel king, who once married only to destroy, had now spared his queen for many nights. Whispers rippled through the streets, through the bazaar and the courtyards, until even the humblest servant dared to hope that mercy had returned to the royal heart. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was softer now. The cold marble corridors seemed warmer, lit by torches that flickered like the wings of butterflies. Perfume drifted through the air, sandalwood, jasmine, and rose, filling every corner with a gentle sweetness that had long been absent. Scheherazade sat before her mirror as Dunyazad braided her hair with golden threads. Her eyes reflected both strength and fatigue. Sister Dunyazad whispered, "The king's gaze has changed. I have seen it. He no longer looks upon you as an executioner looks upon his prey." Scheherazade smiled faintly, though her hands trembled. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but a storm can calm before it strikes again. I must be careful. One tale at a time. That is how hearts are healed." As night deepened, the call of the muezzin echoed faintly across the city, signaling the hour of rest. But for Scheherazade, the night was her stage. She entered the royal chamber where Sharjar waited, no longer with the burning anger of old, but with the quiet anticipation of a man who had learned to listen. "Tell me, my queen," he said, his tone gentler than before, "what happens next to the merchant who faced the mighty demon?" Scheherazade smiled, bowing gracefully. "My king, I shall tell you, but within that tale lies another, and within that, yet another. 4 stories are like stars. One light leads to another, and soon the sky itself is aglow." And so she began. Her voice filled the chamber, rising and falling like waves upon the sea. She spoke of loyalty and betrayal, of love tested by time, and of the magic that binds all hearts. Shahryar listened, his fingers tracing idle patterns upon the table. As his eyes followed her every gesture, when the tale reached its most wondrous twist, she paused. "My king," she said, lowering her gaze, "the dawn will soon break, and my story remains unfinished." Shahryar sighed deeply. "You weave such enchantment, Shah. Each time I think I understand your tale, you reveal another truth. Very well, live yet another day, and tomorrow night you shall continue." And thus it went, one night after another, story after story. The months passed like dreams. Where once Sharjar's court had been filled with fear, now there was music, laughter, and life. The queen's tales were not merely entertainment. They were lessons, mirrors of mercy, justice, and wisdom. One evening, when a full moon bathed the city in silver light, the king invited Scheherazade to walk with him through the palace gardens. The air was cool, the fountains sang, and nightingales perched among the date palms. "Tell me, Scheherazade," the king asked quietly, "why do you risk your life each night for these stories? Why not beg for mercy or flee from me when you had the chance?" Scheherazade looked at him calmly. "Because, my lord, mercy begged for is not true mercy, and a heart escaped is not a heart healed. I chose to face you, not to survive, but to remind you what it means to be human." Her words struck deep into the king's heart. For the first time, he felt the weight of his deeds, the countless lives lost to his rage. He turned away, ashamed, while Scheherazade continued gently. "You have heard tales of kings and demons, of love and vengeance. Now, perhaps, you must write your own story, one of forgiveness." That night, the king did not sleep. He walked alone beneath the stars, remembering every word she had spoken, every moment he had condemned an innocent soul. When dawn finally came, he made a decision that would change the kingdom forever. He ordered that no woman in his land should ever again suffer because of his wrath. Then, he summoned his vizier. "My father," said Scheherazade's voice from the shadows, trembling, "what fate awaits me now?" The king turned toward her, not as a ruler, but as a man redeemed. "No fate, but joy," he said softly. "Scheherazade, you have given me back my soul. You shall be, not my prisoner, but my wife, the true queen of my heart, and my kingdom." And so, at sunrise, the cruel king and the brave storyteller were wed once more, not in fear, but in love. Bells rang throughout the land, and for the first time in years, peace returned to the hearts of the people. Scheherazade had triumphed, not through magic or battle, but through wisdom, patience, and the power of a story. The marriage of King Scheherazade and Queen Shah was not the end of their story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. That would echo through time, like music carried by the wind. Though the king had promised peace, Scheherazade continued to tell her stories each night, not out of fear, but from love, for she believed that tales were the soul's light, and that even the heart, once lost in darkness, needed its flame to stay alive. Each evening, when the moon rose over the jeweled palace, the queen sat beside the king upon silken cushions. Candles flickered in golden lamps, casting soft halos around them. Dunyazad, ever faithful, would sit nearby, eager for the next adventure. And Scheherazade would begin. "My gracious king, tonight I shall tell you of a fisherman who found a sealed brass jar beneath the sea, a jar that held a mighty jinn who had vowed revenge against all mankind." Her voice flowed like a river, smooth and deep. The king leaned forward, his eyes bright with wonder. And what happened next? He would ask, forgetting all else. Night after night, Scheherazade spun her web of wonder. The tales unfolded of princes turned to stone, of sailors shipwrecked upon islands of mystery, of poor men blessed by fortune and greedy men cursed by their own desires. There was Sinbad, the sailor, who braved storms and serpents to find treasures beyond imagination. There was Ali Baba, who learned the secret words that opened the cave of thieves. Open sesame. There was Aladdin, the poor boy who found a lamp that could summon a genie vast as the heavens. And there were countless others, merchants, queens, beggars, and wanderers, each bearing a fragment of human truth. The nights became years, and the years became legend. Each tale carried a message of justice, kindness, and wisdom, all veiled in the shimmer of magic. Through them, Scheherazade taught the king to listen, to question, and to dream. He learned that even a ruler, mighty as he was, must bow before the lessons of the heart. In time, Shahryar changed completely. His cruelty melted like ice beneath the sun. He treated his people with compassion, forgave his enemies, and rewarded the poor. Under his rule, the kingdom flourished. Markets overflowed with goods, gardens bloomed with flowers, and the sound of laughter returned to the streets. The people, once afraid to speak his name, now praised him as Shahryar the Wise. And all knew that the true light behind the throne was Scheherazade, the queen whose courage had turned fear into love. But her nights of storytelling did not end easily. After 1,001 nights, nearly 3 years, Scheherazade finally felt the weight of her tales lift from her heart. One evening, when the lamps were lit and the air smelled of jasmine and myrrh, she finished her last story. The king listened in silence. When she spoke her final words, she folded her hands and bowed her head. "My king," she said softly, "there are no more tales left in me. I have told you of magic and fate, of sorrow and joy. The rest must now be written by our lives." Shahryar was silent for a long time. Then he rose and walked to her, his eyes filled with tears, not of grief, but of gratitude. "You have given me back more than I can ever repay," he said. "You gave me 1,000 nights of wonder, and through them, 1,000 lessons of the heart." Scheherazade looked up, her gaze steady. "And what have you learned, my king?" "That a story," he whispered, "can heal what even time cannot." He took her hand, and together they stepped out onto the balcony where dawn was breaking. The first rays of sunlight touched their faces, painting them gold. Below, the city stirred the call to prayer, rising like a song of hope. In that moment, the kingdom awoke to peace. The cruel chapter had ended forever, yet beyond their reign, the stories lived on. They traveled by caravan across deserts, by ship across seas, whispered by mothers to their children, sung by poets in the marketplaces of distant lands. And even now, when the world grows dark and weary, the voice of Scheherazade can still be heard in the wind, reminding all who listen that within every tale lies the power to transform, to redeem, and to love. For she was not merely a queen, nor simply a storyteller. She was the keeper of the world's dreams, the woman who saved a kingdom with nothing but her words. And thus, the 1,001 nights became eternal, a gift of wisdom, wonder, and courage to all who would hear them. Years passed in peace across the golden kingdom of King Shahryar and Queen Shah. The land, once shadowed by sorrow, now flourished under the warmth of justice and love. The cries of grief that once haunted the palace were replaced by songs of joy. The laughter of children echoing through its courtyards. Scheherazade, now a mother, would sit beneath the shade of date palms with her children gathered around her, their eyes wide, their hearts eager. "Tell us a story, mother," they would plead. She would smile gently, the same smile that had once calmed a cruel king, and begin, once upon a time, in a land beyond the desert winds. Her voice carried through the gardens, soft as silk, strong as truth. The servants would pause in their work. The guards at the gates would listen from afar, and even the birds seemed to quiet, as though the very world leaned closer to hear her words. The king, watching from his balcony, would smile too, for every story she told to their children reminded him of his own rebirth, the man he had once been, and the man she had helped him become. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the skies in gold and crimson, Scheherazade and Shahryar walked together through their gardens. The years had gentled them both. Her beauty now carried the wisdom of time, and his once fierce eyes now held only peace. "My queen," Shahryar said softly, "I have often wondered, how did you never falter? Each night, knowing that dawn might bring your death, how did you find the strength to speak?" Scheherazade looked toward the fountain where lily bloomed and replied, "Because I believed, my king, that even a single story told with love could change a heart, even yours." He bowed his head, moved by her words. "And it did. You gave me life through tales, not power through fear. I learned that a ruler must not control his people's silence, but earn their voices. That is the truest crown a king can wear." She smiled, her eyes shimmering in the twilight. "Then my purpose was fulfilled." As time flowed on, the stories Scheherazade once told in the secrecy of night began to travel beyond the palace walls. Merchants carried them on their tongues as they crossed the deserts. Sailors repeated them across the oceans. Scholars wrote them upon scrolls so that the wisdom of her words would never fade. The tales found their way to every corner of the world, to Persia, to India, to Arabia, to distant lands where strange tongues spoke her name in awe. Each culture took her stories and made them their own, yet the heart of them remained unchanged. Lessons of mercy, courage, and the endless wonder of imagination. Generations passed, and still her voice endured. In marketplaces and palaces alike, people would gather under lantern light to hear her stories told again, of Sinbad and his perilous voyages across unknown seas, of Aladdin and the lamp that made wishes come true, of Ali Baba and the secret cave that hid both greed and fate. But beneath every adventure, every miracle, lived Scheherazade's true message, that words can heal where swords destroy, that wisdom outshines gold, and that a woman's courage can change the fate of a kingdom. On her final days, when Scheherazade's hair had turned silver like the moon she once spoke beneath, she sat once more beside Shahryar, now old and gentle. Together, they watched their grandchildren play beneath the same stars that had once listened to her thousand tales. "Do you ever regret those long nights?" he asked softly. She laughed, her voice still like music. "How can one regret the nights that saved a life and gave birth to 1,000 more?" He took her hand, and together they gazed into the heavens. "Then the world shall never forget you, my Scheherazade," he said, and he was right. For long after the sands of time buried their kingdom, the stories lived on, whispered by storytellers in tents, sung by travelers around campfires, written in books that would one day cross oceans. They would be called Olif, Layla wa Layla, the 1,001 Nights, a treasure of human imagination, born from one woman's bravery, one man's redemption, and the eternal power of a tale well told. And so it is said that when the stars shine brightest above the deserts of the east, one can still hear the echo of her voice, soft as moonlight, timeless as the wind. Listen well, my friends, for a story never truly ends. It lives in every heart that dares to dream. And thus ends the tale of Scheherazade, the storyteller who conquered cruelty with wisdom, and taught the world that even in the darkest night, a single story can awaken the dawn.